Welcome back to this episode of the Law of Relevancy podcast. Today, I'm bringing in another industry expert, Deanna Shimota, who is the founder and CEO of GrowthMode Marketing. It's a marketing agency based way up in the cold Wisconsin area, in Minnesota, that whole part of the Great Lakes, where she specializes in just the B2B side of demand gen marketing for B2B organizations. Deanna, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, you are also the host of the Demand Gen Fix podcast, where I know that you cover a lot of these topics all the time. What I'd like to talk about today is really, let's get into like this overview mode. I'd really like for you to go ahead and define for us, what is demand gen versus lead gen?
Yeah, so I'll start with lead generation because I think a lot of organizations are still leading their marketing efforts with lead generation. And with that, your marketing programs are really only focused on the 5% of companies that are currently in market. And you're doing strategies and tactics where basically you're going out and you're asking prospects for a meeting and you're trying to pull them into your sales process. So a really simplistic way to think about lead generation would be an organization that hires an SDR team. They get a research report created. They run some digital ads. They have a form in front of that. You fill it out. The SDR starts chasing after you to contact you, right? The challenge with that is that's not actually demonstrating buying intent. It's showing interest in your content. And with the way buyers prefer to make their purchase decisions today, it's just not as impactful as it used to be.
Well, let's talk about
Demand
that.
generation.
Yeah, let's get into that.
Yeah.
Like, let's talk about how that buying process has changed for B2B.
Yeah, so if you look at the statistics that are coming out of Gartner and Forrester, and I can say we are seeing this in the market too with our own clients, B2B decision makers are making up to 80% of that purchase decision before they're willing to engage with a sales rep. It's now taking 66 touches on average for them to even, notice a company and be willing to have, some engagement with them. And 72% of B2B prospects have said they would prefer to have zero interaction with a sales rep. What that means is they're engaging much later in the purchase process with an organization and their sales team than they were in the past. They're going out, they're doing their own research. And quite frankly, if you step back and you think about it, if you are only focusing on the companies that are in market right now, which is only 5% of them, during a good economy. Now, when the economy is a little more rough, and people are pulling back on spend for their companies, it might be 1%. You're missing the majority of the market, right? And you're not going to convince someone who's not in market now to buy right now, especially if you have a really expensive enterprise level software technology. They're not going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars on a whim, right? So you want to make sure that you're getting out in the market and building trust and credibility and that brand awareness long before they're in market. And that's where demand generation comes into play, because really with that, you're taking a step back and you're focusing on driving value, not just with the 5% that are currently in market, but also the 95% who are looking to buy right now. So your marketing programs are focused on building brand awareness, credibility, trust to create demand for your products and services and ultimately capture it. And the flip side, whereas lead generation, you're going out and you're asking them for a meeting and you're trying to pull them into your sales process. With demand generation, you're building this strategy to get more prospects to ask you for a meeting and invite you into their buying process when they're ready to have that conversation.
That's a great overview. And even if your SDR was able to get lucky and contact one of those 5% at the exact moment when they are somewhere in that buying process, if you haven't been part of that consideration set, you've got pretty slim odds anyway, right? Because that you haven't built any of that trust preliminarily.
I totally agree, because I think, the reality is most organizations, when they're evaluating a purchase, they're going to narrow it down to 2 to 3 vendors, right? And so the vendors they've probably already got in mind and know like who they want to go with, and they're doing their due diligence, especially if they really have made up to 80% of that purchase decision. So if you're not on their radar before they're in market, the likelihood of making their short list is pretty minuscule. And it's not a great place to come from. Occasionally you might jump in right at the right time and find that sale moves forward. But a lot of times with lead generation, when you're collecting the names and the SDRs are chasing after these individuals trying to engage in conversations and find the opportunities, those leads tend to move really slowly through the sales pipeline, and close rates, overall wins are really low. And so when you're playing a quantity game versus a quality game, and it's like, let's get leads. And I talk to organizations all the time where they have a lot of pressure to meet their revenue targets.
Right.
They're being pushed. They're desperate for those leads, right? So they go to marketing. They're like, help, we need leads. We need them now. Put some campaigns in place. Let's run some digital ads. Let's bring some names in the door. Let's have conversations. There's a lot of time and money that goes into chasing after individuals. And if they're not actually in market to buy, the success rate with those opportunities is very low.
How do you deal with
And,
that? How do you deal with that when you've got a
well,
customer that is under pressure to meet a plan, a sales
mhm.
plan, and they need to generate leads? Like, how do you explain to them that, hey, this is especially for these larger purchases? Because in B2B, the purchases, like you said, could be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars. Usually, those sales cycles are very long. Like, how do you
Right.
manage those expectations?
I think that's just it. You have to help them understand what realistic expectations are, because it's a very reactionary, like knee jerk, we need leads now. The problem is, to your point, Cords, if you're behind on revenue, you're not going to hit your targets for the year, and it's already, September of that year, and your sales cycle tends to be 18 months. Any leads generated now have a low probability of actually closing and impacting for quite a while, right?
Yeah.
So you have to take a step back and think about, okay, are we just playing the short game with our marketing and trying to capture the in-market demand right now? Or are we looking at this more holistically and seeing the forest through the trees of, this is a long-term strategy, and Rome wasn't built in a day. You can't just turn on a campaign and expect really good, high quality in-market leads to come in the door when you're selling a very expensive technology solution that's going to take a while to, for someone to come along on board with that, right? So you have to have a balance between the short-term strategies and the long-term strategies. And I think so many organizations get so focused on the short term that they overlook building out the long-term strategies. And in the end, that ends up limiting their growth potential, because they never get off that merry-go-round of, we need more leads, we
Right.
need them now,
They never
because they're
filled that
coming from
pipeline.
behind,
You've got to build
right?
a huge pipeline of people that are at various points in the sales
Yeah.
cycle to actually grow your market share. That's that's what we've seen. What are some of the things you talk about building trust? Obviously, content is a big part of that. What types of content are you seeing that do the best job of that?
So there is no like one size fits all. What I always tell companies when I'm talking to them is, a key factor is really identifying like, who is the ideal customer profile.
Mm-hmm.
And it can't be, we're trying to sell everything to everyone. And an example that I'll use, I work with a lot of companies in the HR technology space. And it is very common when I talk to their CEOs or their marketing leaders and they say, who is your ideal customer profile? Who do you sell to? They're like, well, I mean, basically, we can sell to anyone that has employees. Like, wow, that is a really big total addressable market. Good for you. But how much traction are you getting? Because there are over
Yeah.
21,000 plus HR technology solutions out there. And even if you narrow it down to just your category, maybe there's only 750 competitors. That's a lot of companies marketing and trying to get airtime, right? And get buyers to pay attention. So you have to know who your ideal customer profile is and why that impacts what kind of content you do and what kind of tactics you use to distribute that content. Is you need to talk to those individuals at those ideal customer profile type of companies and ask them outright, like, how do you consume information? What type of information do you like? What type of formats do you like? Where are you going to get that information? Because that can really fuel then how you execute on marketing to those individuals. Because, for example, some industries you might be selling to engineers and they're very analytical. They might, in general, be more interested in getting long form content and research and digging into it. On the flip side, if you're selling to marketers or salespeople, they may not be as analytical, where they're not going to spend time reading your 30-page research report that you had, worked with Forrester to create. They're going to be more likely to consume smaller bite-sized contents. And so you have to look at your content and what you create based on who your audience is and what is most likely to resonate with them. But even within those groups, like, okay, you sell to a bunch of engineers, we can assume they're all analytical, but different strokes for different folks. Some people consume information differently. So I think it's important to develop what I would call cornerstone content, which are
Sure.
those big meaty pieces, and such as that research report. And then you slice and dice it down into cobblestones so that not only do you have one research report, you might have 45 other supporting pieces that have bits and pieces of that information, so that depending on how a person prefers to get their information, you've got that type of content for them to consume. So whether it's all at once or bite-sized pieces that you're spoon feeding them over a few months, you get all that information in front of them.
Yeah, that's really good information. One of the rules of thumb that we have is whatever it is that you're providing, it all has to be relevant. Like we wouldn't want to share research from 2019 because a lot has changed since then, right? So that's one of the things that we always think about when we're doing it is like, when we do the persona development, when we figure out who is the exact customer and what problems are we solving and who is it the best fit for. The great thing about B2B marketing and one of the things that we look at is, it's like you were talking about, like, who is that universe of customers that you're really talking to? Because there's a lot of B2B databases out there. We could actually create that database of all of them.
Yes.
It might only be 10,000 customers that are an actual really good fit. And so you have an opportunity to truly know them. And I definitely like the strategy that you mentioned about creating one or two pieces of that really meaty content, because if you're working with an organization like Gartner or Forrester or one of those other research organizations, you're creating some very high authority content. It's got a lot of trust. It's going to transfer a lot of trust to your brand. And because it's, might be 10,000 words long with graphs and charts and things like that, a lot of that are great little mini doorways, little front doors into the big meaty piece of content. And it can be part of a holistic social media strategy.
Right. And it may feel repetitive to continually put that content out there, but if it feels repetitive to you, you're probably doing it right. Your average listener, reader, watcher, they're not seeing every piece of content that you put out there. So for them, it's not repetitive. And if you think about it, like, how many times do you see a commercial on TV, right? Before it sticks with you and then you start to remember and you start to sing along with the jingle. Like, there is a need for repetition to consistently put your message out there so that it actually sticks with people and eventually they start to expect it and follow along with it. And if they're in your ideal customer profile, they even look at your unique point of view and they start to agree with it, right? And when they start to agree with it, they're more interested in consuming your content because they want to read more about it, they want to hear more about it, they want to watch more about it, right?
How do we measure that particular piece? How do we know that people are starting to agree with our content?
I have found you can kind of measure it in micro measurements, meaning if you build out a unique point of view and we look at it and we'll build out a framework for our clients where we'll help them identify, like, here's the overarching theme, here's the pillars that fall underneath it, and here's all the pain points and how your solutions kind of solve and address those pain points. So then you go out and you create all this content and you start to see, like, are there different pillars that resonate more than others? And it's really easy to see pretty quickly if something has traction, because if you're putting emails out there, you can see which things people are engaging with. If you're putting social media posts out there, you can see which things people are engaging with. You just look at all these omni-channel approaches and you start to watch, like, how people are reacting or engaging with it, but also going out and having conversations out in the market with people and being able to see how they're reacting to it. Are they like, you know what, I haven't thought about it that way. That's a really good point. Let's talk more about it. Or if they're like, yeah, I get that, but XYZ. If it's the second, then okay, we're not hitting the mark with them yet. We need to refine our unique point of view in the market.
Yeah.
But if you are getting those kind of, micro feedback of people responding and interested in talking about what you're bringing to the table, that is a sign that you should lean into that and continue to build that out into all of the marketing that you're doing.
So
And
it sounds like
go
a
ahead.
combination of social listening and sentiment analysis. So
Yeah.
the social listening tool can measure if you're getting, published, or people are, talking about your content or engaging with the content that you're publishing. And then the sentiment analysis tells you whether or not it's positive or negative. If it's positive, it sounds like they're agreeing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the keys to look at, if you're in a really crowded market, unless you've already established this really big brand awareness and credibility and don't need to worry about gaining traction in the market, sometimes I think you need to take a step back and figure out, like, okay, my total addressable market might be every company that has employees, right?
Right.
But I need to narrow down my audience in order to accelerate my growth. And what I mean by that, if you think, for example, taking the HR technology again, if I am a CFO or an HR leader who is making the decision to buy some HR technology for my company, let's say it's a rewards and recognition platform. If I have 10 to 20 different companies marketing to me talking about that, in the grand scheme of things, I'm standing back and I'm saying they all kind of do the same thing. This one has a cool interface. This one's more cost effective. This one has this one different tweak. But in the grand scheme of things, they're not drastically different, right? So how do I choose which one? It becomes overwhelming for that buyer. Now, if one of those companies comes in and they've really defined their ideal customer profile and their unique point of view is very targeted to that ideal customer profile, right, and that ideal customer profile, it's not a buyer persona for an individual. This is the profile of the companies that are the best fit for our solutions.
So they could be
like
speaking about industry challenges, or like with the workforce or whatnot, right?
Exactly. And there's so much more that goes into an ideal customer profile than just picking an industry. But for the sake of simplicity, like in this example, if you think about it, if there is one HR tech company in the rewards and recognition space that comes with their marketing and they're like, hey, we understand how challenging it is to manage a workforce in manufacturing. You've got shift differentials, you've got third shift, you've got office workers who get treated differently than the people on the plant floor, you've got high turnover, you've got, dangers on the factory floor, a lot of training that needs to be done. All of those things that are unique to being a manufacturer, they're not going to have quite the same challenges that, say, a hospital does with their employee base, right? So if you start to position your marketing and hyper focus it to that group, okay, I'm getting marketed to by 10 to 20 competitors. Which one do you think stands out in my mind? Which one do you think I relate to the best?
Or understands
Which one
you.
am I most like you? Right. So you're more likely to get traction with that smaller group because you're speaking their language and they're like, this one gets me. versus when you're trying to be everything to everyone, your message gets really diluted because you're trying to appeal to the masses and instead you're resonating with no one.
Yeah. So that is a great guidebook on how to put together the right content. One of the things that as marketers we're seeing a lot show up in our space and in our industry are these generative AI using large language models like ChatGPT to create personalized email spam, basically, because
Yeah.
there's rules that allow you to spam business people. And anyhow, I'm seeing it quite a lot. I get a ton of them in my inbox. How have you encountered those bots, either with your clients or with competitors in their space? And where do you think that's headed?
Yeah, so we don't recommend that for our clients. They're usually not big enough and sophisticated enough that they would even consider that. And we're looking at how do you build a digital footprint that builds credibility and trust in the
Right.
market. And I think a quick way to lose credibility and trust is to mass blast your spam bot emails out, right? And we'll all get them in our inboxes and look at them and are like, I know this person's just doing their job, but wow, did you miss the mark when you reached out to me? I'm not in market. I'm not even in this industry half the time. Like there's just sometimes it's pretty obvious
Yeah.
when it's mass generated spam bot
Like
stuff.
our name of our company is
I
Bake More Pies. And so we get a lot of them about bakeries and things like that. People thinking we're in that kind of an industry and it's really just a play on words. But that might be a
Right,
good
right.
example
And I
where
can totally see that. You probably get more of really bad spam than the average company because of that. I think there is a way, though, to look at the AI and figure out ways to pull it into your marketing mix. And I know, Cords, you and I were talking about this before we hit record. If you look at it, how do I use it from a lead gen standpoint, where you're going out and you're trying to uncover people and ask them for meetings? That's where it can feel really spammy. If you use it from a demand generation standpoint where you're like, okay, I want to get this out to a lot of people. I'm not trying to sell them. I am trying to put really good, really targeted content in front of them because I think if they read it, they'll want to read more of our stuff and push it out that way. Then I think it can be a valuable tool. But you have to really think about how you use it and how the prospects experience it, because I think a lot of times in marketing, even though as marketers we always talk about look at it from the customer perspective, I don't think that always happens.
no, I mean,
We're so
those short-term
pushed to drive
goals.
leads.
Yeah, exactly. Those short-term goals can really get in the way sometimes to doing things the right way.
Mhm.
And with an agency like what I have, which has been grown through referrals, it's really about being authentic and being genuine and being honest and transparent over many, many years.
Yeah.
Because people don't choose their agency every year. A lot, companies a lot of times will keep the same agency for years and years. But there's the evidence and like your product and the return and the happiness of your clients. And it's that way for everything. It's that way in personal relationships as well as business relationships. But I do like if someone were to use that technology because it's growing very, very fast. I think we've probably already jumped the shark with how people are using it in terms it's down on the way down. And it especially if you've got an established brand. If you are a startup and you've got to get to market and you've got investors and things like that, I can understand using it, especially if you're doing something unique. But I love the idea of using tools like that to try to make it more relevant as to why somebody receiving that email might think that the content is pretty cool. And then send them
Right.
over to some content and treat them like they're very, very high in the funnel. Don't treat them like, hey, I know we've just met, but here's a joke. And, and we've done something unique. And by the way, we have a sale today, today only. It's like the worst
Right.
possible thing you can do. And if you're an established brand, you can really hurt your brand by using strategies like that, especially if you're short-term focused.
Totally. And I think of like, I just saw on LinkedIn someone who has quite a following posted about Facebook or Meta, and how, oh, I filled out a form, that means I'm going to get 7 calls a day for the next 3 weeks and 15 emails a day. And, they're putting it out there and everyone else is like, yep, that's happened to me too. Well, that brand experience, like, there's a reason nobody wants to fill out your marketing forms anymore, right? Because as organizations out there trying to generate more business, we've gone overboard in, oh, they read my article. It's time to call them. Let's turn them into a sale.
Yeah.
And the reality is these people are not in market to buy. They're interested in your content. They'll tell you when they're ready to buy. But if you try to push it beforehand, I think it can leave a really bad taste in someone's mouth. And some people are too nice to say no to taking the meeting, even though they have no intention of buying. And I just think how much time and money is wasted by organizations because that is happening, right?
Yeah, call them and ask them if they had any questions about the content or if they would like some more, because we've got some additional case studies, and leave it there because now you've just added value, right? You haven't asked any for anything from them. Like keep giving, 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 and you're being helpful. If you frame it in that way, it's very easy to make those calls and make those connections and have them be more of attraction and less of a distraction or slippage in terms of your sales efforts.
Yep, totally.
One of the allegories for the sales process that I like to think about a lot of times is, and it's very difficult when people are in it, but when you think about, like if you go back to that, terrifying time in your life when you're maybe like in the dating scene, right? It's like, when is it appropriate to, go on that next date or whatever? Because it's like the first thing you want to talk to somebody about is, hey, let's not go on like a 3-day vacation together. Let's go have coffee. Let's get to know each other a little bit. And I think when you think about sales in that way, it can really help the throughput of the sales process because, cold calling and doing a lot of that is a very important part of the B2B marketing and sales process of developing those relationships at scale. It's a very important way of how it gets done. It's not like just having digital content out there is going to be like your silver bullet. But it is important to understand at what stage of this process that you're in, because that's how you need to act. And that can build a much more robust pipeline. One of the tricks that we've seen that I love to share with people is video content. With as much research as people are doing, and there is nothing wrong with putting a 20-minute video on YouTube because it's way longer than a lot of people would think. It's like, wow, I only want to watch videos that are 5 minutes long. Well, that's fine, but you can't get into all of the details about how your technology is changing the world or making a much happier experience or telling testimonials and things like that in a short piece of content. And by the way, 20 minutes is about an average commute time if somebody's still going into the office and they can listen to it on their way home. YouTube is a very powerful way to build credibility at scale because not only, just like this podcast, you obviously know what you're talking about when it comes to B2B marketing. People can see that you're not looking at notes. You're talking about what you know about, and that comes across very, very easily. And so video is a very powerful way of developing relationships at scale with people that have never met you before or that you've never met before. And so we're big proponents of video.
I totally agree. I mean, take this podcast as an example. If you're video recording it and you're doing the audio, you're going to have some people that will listen to the audio and they'll hear your voice and they'll feel connection. They'll consume multiple episodes, hopefully, right? And if you have the video and they go and watch video, like with my own podcast, we only started it in January, and podcasts are a slow burn. You don't turn it on and suddenly you have 5,000 people listening to every episode. But, over time, as they're consuming the stuff, it's not uncommon to get a call from someone. And the first thing they say is, I love your videos. I just find myself agreeing with them and going along with it. And half the battle is won by then, right? Because They feel like they know you, they know your name, they know what you talk about, they know how you think about these things, they know people on your team. Like it really is powerful to build that personal connection before you reach out to them, right? Because they're more likely to be open to having a conversation with you if they feel like, I know who you are, I trust you, you're credible, like, okay, let's have that conversation. I think, one of the things about demand generation that's important to note is it's not okay, we're going to put all this content out there and just sit back and wait for the leads to roll in. Some leads will roll in, yes. People will be more likely to raise their hand, but it should still be partnered with an outbound motion to help remind them that you're there and to see like how they engage with the content, because you can't measure everything they engage with, right? Like if they're watching your YouTube video or listening to your podcast, you don't necessarily have visibility to know that Jim Smith at XYZ company just did this. It's time to call him, right? But if you're doing outbound motion too, and you can see the kind of stuff they're engaging with that you can look at, you can see if there is anything they're doing that might suggest some level of buying intent. So for example, if they're going to your website and they're looking at your pricing page, they're watching your video demos on your technology, they're looking at the case studies, that's a level of buying intent.
Absolutely.
You're not likely to do that unless you have some level of interest, right? It doesn't necessarily mean I'm in market right now, but it means they're thinking about it and they're thinking about, eventually maybe I would like to have that. So those are the type of things to look at to determine, do we reach out to this individual? Do we see if we can engage in a sales conversation? Versus if you can see they're going to your website and they always read your blogs.
Yeah.
But
Well,
that doesn't necessarily mean buying intent.
And I think that, and a lot of times, we listen to marketing content where, like theories like that have been talked about for a very long time, but there are actually, like, it's important to know what tools to use in order to do that. And a tool like a sophisticated CRM, like a HubSpot, for example, where it's got pixel tracking, it's got digital fingerprinting technology to where you can see the actual individual visitor going from page to page. You're not going to get that level of detail in Google Analytics. Google Analytics can only deal with the aggregate. And so it is important when you're creating this content and as part of a plan, and we're in budgeting season right now, to think through like, okay, what do I actually need in order to get this done? And one of the uses of AI that we've seen be very, very powerful in content creation is a very appropriate use of a tool like ChatGPT, especially the ChatGPT 4, in our opinion, because it does a great job of pencil to paper. It does know a lot about certain industries, the whole body of knowledge. You can get very good at querying it and helping to help build out frameworks of content that a marketing person can then take, because it's going to get probably 5 to 10% of the content very, very wrong and very, very inappropriate. So like you have to have that human filter that rides above it. But there are tools out there for very efficient marketers to get a lot done using tools like that. And so we highly encourage that as a practice. You still have to create the artwork. You still got to do the creative. You still got to understand what that creative needs to look like and how to put it to use. But I think looking at some of these brand new AI tools in that way is a great way to leverage them.
Yeah, I agree. There are a lot of options coming to market that are AI based. And I think as marketers, the knee-jerk reaction was, no, that'll never work for us, right? Like I can tell you, my graphic design team, when I was like, there's tools out there that can help create, mood boards and different styles on images and stuff. And they're like, no, they'll never be able to do my job. And it's like, well, it's not replacing your job.
Yeah.
You still have to have that human element, but it can make you more efficient. So instead of going and searching for 100 different photos, you can use AI to come up with a bunch of different concepts around the same themes, right?
Right.
And create different treatments on those photos to use for that mood board to then, present to the client and have them identify, like, I like this style, and then go do your job of creating all these things and building it out. Or, from a content perspective, I was just told about a tool called Adaptify AI, where a friend was saying, for her company, she put in some key SEO phrases, looked at their ideal customer profile, and this tool goes and creates like 100 different articles at once for them. And she said, some of them were way off the mark, but some of them were really decent and took her less time to edit than when she had her own copywriters creating them for her. And she got them posted. She said, I got 20 blog articles posted in one day, which, holy
That's
cow,
amazing.
right? Like
that's incredible.
Sounds crazy. But then she was showing the dashboard and she's like, look, this one has been up a week. It's already ranking number 1. Our SEO team can't get things to rank that quickly, but somehow this AI tool is doing that. Now, you can't just take the articles and post them up there as is and expect that it's going to represent your business well. But she said it was, maybe 70% there.
That's a very streamlined workflow.
30% of it tweaking it. Yeah, exactly. And, as agencies, as we look at how to provide better, faster, cheaper for clients, right? Like, if you need to create this really big digital footprint out in the market, because that's how buyers are learning about companies and making most of their decision. Okay, I need more content, but that's a really heavy lift.
Yeah.
How do I do that faster? Here's an option. Maybe it's, instead of pure copywriting from your agency, they're offering you a package that is supported by AI.
Yeah.
With your copywriters, like, polished.
Or some of these AI tools are very expensive. Like, we can pay the license, we can produce some of this. You're, as a client, doing some of the final phases of editing to make it more technically accurate. We just had, a couple days ago, we had an example where we were working with a national B2C client, and we had some concepts for a campaign. Well, we were able to, and one of the worst things you can ever do as a creative is ask a client to imagine something. Like, you have to show it to them. You need to show them exactly how it is. And so we were able to use the AI tool to generate a very close proxy for what we were trying to explain. And it was an image of this, this creature who was doing this thing. And it was just like, oh my God, like, no one's done that. It was like amazing. And they got it because they could see it. And so we're all in on how we can leverage these tools. Well, Deanna, thank you again for joining us. It's great to hear about how you're working on the demand gen side of things and helping clients. And we're really excited to learn more about how you're doing that going on into the future. Thank you again for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And where can people follow you and learn more about your thought leadership?
Yeah, so if you're interested in learning more about demand generation and how it can help become a catalyst for growth for your organization, check out GrowthMode Marketing's podcast. It's called The Demand Gen Fix. You can find it on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, basically anywhere podcasts are. Also, follow me, Deanna Shimota, on LinkedIn. I regularly post insights and best practices on demand generation. And of course, we provide lots of information on our website, which is growthmodemarketing.com.
I love it. You're doing all of the best practices for yourself. I love it. It's a great way to do it.
Trying to. Little bit of the cobbler's children with no shoes, right? Like, we focus more on clients at times, but we try to eat our own dog food too.
You have to do it, because then it shows clients how easy it is and how it can get done.
Yep.
And you can find our podcast anywhere where podcasts are found. Please follow us, like us, share us for the Law of Relevancy podcast, as well as the Bake More Pies website and properties. Thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next time.